All right, we're doing it.
So we got a fight, and I threw him out of the house.
He said he shot himself, and I was in complete disbelief.
Find something that'll make you smile and laugh every day.
Seeing the mother and father holding the baby.
Enter as strangers.
Welcome to another episode of Enter as Strangers podcast number 10. And today we've got a good friend of mine in, and a good friend of Eric's too. He's known him forever. Our friend Jim Whitaker. How's it going, Jim?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. We kind of cover this in every podcast, but we kind of like to go over it. You've listened to enough of the podcast that you kind of know our format, but we want to kind of give a perspective of, a recent situation that we know, well, I wouldn't say recent, been going on for a while, that you've been kind of experiencing in your life, and want to get to the story within the story for you. So we kind of give our perspective, and I think that we kind of have a unique perspective because, we spend time hanging out with you from time to time where you come up to the shop and shoot the shit with us. So we'll just kind of get right to it. I'll kind of give a little bit of backstory here. And you and I grew up together. We met when we were about 14, 15, somewhere in there. You're like a year older than me. So, or a little bit more than a year older than me.
Maybe two.
Yeah. So, but we met in California because we were going to the same church. And, I mean, obviously the same high school too. But like I said, you're a couple years older than me at school and whatnot. But we met in church, and we grew up, as we've stated before on the podcast. Eric and I grew up, LDS, and so did you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I know you from. So I've known you forever, it seems like. So we've had lots of crazy teenage adventures, I should say.
Yeah, I think we've been lucky to have those adventures that, most don't get.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a certain, especially where we grew up in California. Obviously now we're in Utah, where the culture here is predominantly Mormon.
Which I don't think you can say anymore. I think
No,
actually,
as of today, the president said he doesn't want it called that anymore.
No, I know they're going to they're going to change that. But
right.
Just kind of give my perspective, because obviously in this podcast we want to talk a little bit about what you're going through, your kind of the transition that you're experiencing or have gone through recently. And we grew up LDS, and in California, it was quite a bit different because we were, unlike here, a real minority. So at school and stuff like that, there were the Mormon kids, and at any given time there was just a handful of Mormon kids, and we all hung out together. We all knew each other. Anything we did was with our friends that way. So all my closest friends from, middle school up through high school were all LDS. So anything we did was kind of centered around that for the most part. But I remember the feeling of it felt inclusive in the way that you kind of ran in that circle and it's what you knew. And then you had people that weren't LDS kind of, I had friends that weren't LDS and stuff like that, but all my closest friends were. So a lot of church dances, a lot of church activities, retreats, things like that. So everything we did centered around growing up LDS. Personally, when I moved here, I was 19 when I moved to Utah and had quite a bit of culture shock because it was all of a sudden a lot different. Eric, you were young when you moved here, but
Yeah.
Did you notice a difference?
Yeah, no, I was young. I've always told everybody, I noticed growing up in the church is way different out of state than it is in state.
Yeah.
It seemed more accepting, honestly, out of state. It seemed more, and again, I was young in my perspective, and I didn't have a ton of LDS friends. Never felt like I really fit in with them, but when you moved here, it seemed very staunch, very judgmental in a lot of ways.
Yeah, let's not beat around the bush. It's way more judgmental here than it was there. It's way more the hypocrisy and things like that growing up. So, Jim, when you lived in California forever, you spent some time up in Idaho with family during before your mission, right?
Right.
You served a mission And where'd you serve your mission at?
I served in the Korea Seoul West mission from like July of 1994 to August of 96. And I mean, to just go back a little bit, I spent my first years from like 0 to 12 in Idaho mostly, and then 1996 or 85, something like that. My grandfather died in California, and that's what took us to California, is my grandmother being by herself.
Okay.
And my mom being an only child. So
she went to go help your grandma.
Right, we went to go down there.
Were you born into the church?
No.
So you were.
I was.
Your mom was converted.
Yeah, my mom was
as they
converted
call it.
With we had the missionaries over back when they had like slide projectors and that roll up screen.
Yeah.
So I remember seeing that. Discussions or whatever.
Do you remember how old you were?
Well, I was 8, almost 9 when I was baptized.
Right. So it was in that ballpark somewhere.
Yeah.
So let's back up for a sec. So you lived in California. Obviously, we grew up there, went to high school there, and all that stuff. And then fast forward a little bit, you got married, and you married a girl from Idaho.
Yeah.
Right. And then you guys ended up living in. Did you live in Idaho for a while?
Yeah. Before the mission for 6 months, and then after the mission, my grandparents were up, north of Rexburg for about an hour away.
Right.
So I went up there and worked, and then started school in like January of 97, going to Ricks College.
But when you got married, were you married living in Idaho?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
how old were you when you got married?
26.
I know you lived in Vegas for a while.
Yeah. Before Utah.
Yeah, right. So kind of getting back to what we were just talking about, did you notice a different culture of the Mormon church when you moved here than what you experienced obviously in California or in Las Vegas?
Oh yeah. It seemed the Mormons here, the people here in Utah, are much more judgmental, even though they preach the opposite of acceptance and tolerance. Honestly, there is a judgmental part of it. I was guilty of that. If you didn't see somebody at church, you saw somebody going to the store on Sunday, your flags go up and
like, oh no,
what are they doing? They've gone off the deep end and went to the store.
So, but before we get too deep in, basically, I'll just give a quick synopsis of my perspective, because Enter as Strangers is all about the perspective of individuals, and that's why we have people come in to give their perspectives, and at least initially, the perspectives that we have of our guests versus the perspectives that they have of their story or the things that we know about them. You lived in Vegas. I lived here. You moved here, and you moved up to Ogden. And we saw each other a couple times, but we really didn't hang out a whole lot, busy with life and work and stuff like that. Then you moved a little bit closer from Ogden to Clearfield. And again, we didn't hang out a whole lot. If other friends came into town, we got together. But recently, and I'll say, within the last year or so, we started hanging out quite a bit. And I was privileged, I guess you could call it, or was able to kind of be around, listening to you talk about this kind of transition of thought that you were going through. So me have gone through it for myself after I had moved to Utah and had been here about a year or so. It was really fascinating to me. In the transition I'm talking about is your transition from being a fairly devout Mormon, as they call it, to transitioning out of the church. So that's kind of what we wanted to have you come in and talk about is that transition, because I think that as I listen to you kind of work through that in conversations we'd have, and I would honestly try my best, because I understanding and going through something similar, not quite the same, but something similar. I was always tried to be real conscious of, what I said and what I didn't say, because, something like that can be a big shock to the system, because all of a sudden you might be learning things that you didn't know, or you're kind of getting your eyes open to things.
I'll just call it what it is, an awakening.
It's an awakening. So I'll just tell you, because we try to be as straightforward and unedited as possible on the podcast. One thing before you kind of made the decision to, as I think you put it once, mic drop, the mic drop situation. Maybe we can get to that. But I noticed that you seem to be, I wouldn't say unhappy, but there seemed to be something that was not agreeable in your life, and it was affecting your demeanor. I know, obviously knowing you since we were kids, and then knowing you as a grown adult with children and a family of your own, I had noticed that, so that there was something, and I was pretty sure what it was. And then we started to talk about it. And then when you had made the decision, at least mentally, to commit to kind of transitioning away from that, it was like a different guy walked in here. You showed up one day, it was around New Year's or something. You had been gone out of town for a week or so, and I hadn't seen you in a few weeks. It had been a few weeks, and you walked in the shop, and it was like, man, it was like this guy come bouncing in instantly, and he hadn't even, I didn't know anything. Instantly, your demeanor had changed, and you just kind of had this lightness about you. So, I'm really interested, and I think that there's a lot of people I know that would be really interested in kind of your story and that transition, and I know that there are a lot of groups out there. There's a lot of podcasts out there that talk about and are support for people that are transitioning out of the church, because in a lot of ways, it's very cult-like in nature, or there's a lot of the same kinds of things that take place in any religion are the same kinds of things that happen in what you would define as cult behavior. So I'm just kind of interested in, you said that you were baptized when you were around 8 or 9, and you grew up. Tell us a little bit about your family. Like, where do you fall? I know you've got some sisters. Where do you fall in line? You were raised by a single mom. So are you in the middle? Are you the oldest, the youngest?
Yeah, I'm 2 older sisters than me, and then a younger sister. And
Okay.
my parents divorced, maybe a few years, I think, before we joined the church.
So a house full of girls and you, huh?
Yeah, just me. So, I didn't get any hand-me-downs and
Right.
things like that. So everything I had was, strictly boy. It was kind of nice. I didn't have, I did play with Barbies, but that's, in order to, kind of play with my sisters, I had to do the sisters thing. And I had a Ken doll.
Right.
So,
of course.
Nice.
We had to, have at least some masculinity in the house, even if it was with dolls.
So what was, when you were growing up, in what they call your formative years, what was it, what's your perspective on growing up, Mormon, basically?
Well, it seemed like,
From the perspective of that kid, not necessarily from the perspective of looking back and kind of understanding some of the indoctrination and things like that take place. Like how was it for you?
aside from the church, I had I think I had a very, I'll say privileged childhood. Not that I had, single mother. We didn't have, we didn't have much.
Right.
We had what we needed to get by, but I had the outdoors. Even when I lived in California, before we'd met and really kind of grew as close friends and started hanging out a lot. Up in Idaho, I was always outside playing in the snow, getting kind of lost all day long.
Right.
Just in the
Spent a lot of time outside.
the farm. Well, we didn't have a farm, but we lived out of town,
Right.
and we could play in the farmer's fields. We would turn his hay bales upright for him when he was doing hay. I'd have odd jobs helping him feed the cows. We'd play in this old rickety barn. We'd go down to the creek, which is probably a mile away, and my mother never questioned where we were or if we're getting in trouble, because outdoors was wonderful.
And it was a different time too.
Yeah.
So you spent a lot of time. It sounds like you had a pretty good childhood.
Yeah.
We grew up kind of a lot the same way. The age difference between you and I and Eric is such that, like, his creek was the McCollum River, which we spent plenty of time at in California.
Place was the best.
Yeah.
Love that place.
Yeah, it was the best.
I'm going to buy a second home there.
Yeah. Were you, there's degrees of being active in the church when you, as a kid or before you moved to California, were you guys pretty active in the church, or were you just, you go to church on Sundays and that was about it? Or
I think my mother, being a single mom, I think she really gravitated towards once she had found the religion, because I don't think she was anything before. I don't know if she was even Christian.
Right.
But I'm sure she was she was a good woman.
Right.
And I think once she found the church, she really had found her place.
Some structure, some guidance.
Right, on raising families, and I think she looked to that because being a single mother.
I think you'd be very susceptible to it being a single mother, especially if 3 or 4 kids.
4 kids, and
Right.
they preach families forever.
Right.
And I think that thing.
Well, I'm sure most churches are like this, but the Mormon church has a real structure around. They have a whole built-in system for singles, basically, and
Oh yeah, she went to dances when we moved to California. I think she really gravitated towards this, families forever thing, and I think she really spent a lot of time. Besides working, she went to a lot of, single adult dances, trying to find, just companionship, exactly, because she'd been single for several years, and she didn't get remarried until I was a junior or senior in high school.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah.
I mean, she basically raised, her kids on her own, basically.
What was your perspective being the only male in the house? I know sometimes that only male kind of feels like they got to take on a leadership role of some sort, or, did you feel like you had to conform or fall into that?
Well, once we moved to California, and then, through growing up in the youth program, when you're 12, you get the priesthood, the Aaronic priesthood, you're made a deacon, and that kind of gave me a little sense of, not leadership, but just I had to be a kind of a role model. I had to be the male presence in the house, the priesthood presence in the house, because they always preached that, kind of and I want to kind of preface this. This is my feelings. I'm not speaking for anybody else in the church, and opinions differ, but my feelings is, having the priesthood in the home is so important, because I felt, there's no direction, or if somebody gets sick, what do you do? Mm-hmm. Or, like the priesthood is the power that leads the house. And
right.
So I kind of felt I had to not be the leader, but I had to.
You had a responsibility.
Yeah, exactly, responsibility.
Well, in the church it's a very patriarchal system.
Right. They said, father is the head of the house. And
right. There's, obviously very important roles for the mothers as well as too, but, so it makes sense that you would kind of feel that way based off what you learned and what you were, taught at the time. So when you were a teenager, when we were kids and growing up and doing stuff, did you ever have a sense of things? Like, were there any things that you were taught or that you came across that didn't quite grab you the right way, or you didn't think made a whole lot of sense, or did it all just kind of make sense?
Well, I believed it made sense because I was taught that the leaders I had experienced, life, and so I went off their experiences, their stories, their testimonies, and there's a couple things I didn't quite agree with, but for the most part I was 100% believing and just did exactly what they said. Don't, sexually, no intimacy, go to church on Sunday, pay your tithing, just
Right. All the major guidelines.
check all the boxes,
Right.
because I didn't want to disappoint.
Were you afraid?
Oh yeah, it's a very fear-based religion.
Yeah.
Very guilt
Yeah.
driven.
Guilt and
Right.
fear-based.
And there's a lot of shaming, a lot of guilt, and and publicly too. If you see, I remember I had a friend back then. All of a sudden, he's not participating in activities, and I'm like, well, what happened? How come he's not doing the same things I'm doing? And it wasn't until
Right.
years later I find this out, and I felt so bad because we couldn't talk about like real life issues, and it wasn't until just recently that some things come out about
Right.
the past, and I felt like I didn't really know my friends. We didn't really have good conversations about things that were really happening in our lives, because it just seems we were taught, don't talk about your misdeeds or your indiscretions. So
Yeah, it's very structured and very guided. Now, I will say that, my transition and your transition are different in a lot of ways. And in a second here, I'd like to actually get Eric's perspective on it, because the age gap between us, he'd grown up a teenager. I'm already out of the house. So I don't really know his experience with it, which I think was led quite a bit by my parents after they moved here because of what they experienced and the differences for them. But do you think that that tunnel vision that you're guided into about, like you say, all the stuff, read your scriptures, go to church, pray, no masturbation, all this stuff. I'm talking like teenage age stuff that you're indoctrinated with. Do you feel like, looking back, those things, that kind of stuff is it, because it sucks you into this tunnel and it shapes and conditions who you are as you grow into a young man, you get married and things like that. So looking back at that stuff, do you find, do you consider that damaging to your future self? Do you consider it hindering you or your quality of life at all?
Oh, absolutely. If you take a goldfish and put it in a small bowl, that goldfish is only going to grow so much because the bowl is only this big. But that's how I felt with, even though we had a kind of a good childhood, I felt the church kind of put you in this small bowl, and you can't be the person authentically, genuinely, because it seems like your choices are guided to this one thing: to go to church on Sunday, to go to seminary, to not masturbate, to not have
impure thoughts,
not have a kind of a human experience. Like, I felt like the experience was so focused on the end, but not the journey. And growing up and into adult life, I was very unhappy because I wasn't finding joy in the journey. I was always just focused on the end result,
which is getting to the celestial kingdom,
right?
Essentially,
and it just seemed, to me, kind of impossible because I wasn't, I just wasn't having fun. I wasn't happy, and it wasn't until, I moved to Utah and I see the effects of being Mormon and living near the headquarters, and it's everywhere, and I just didn't feel like I have any diversity in life. Like, it was just one.
Very vanilla.
Right. And then Ogden was nice, though, because Ogden is a wonderful place.
Right.
Because it's a wonderful city with a bunch of.
It's diverse.
It's very diverse, and it was
right.
it was nice to move there from, Las Vegas to.
So, since there's three of us sitting here, Eric, mom and dad moved here, and then they've had a completely different experience about being Mormon when they moved here, and then they just stopped going to church because they decided it wasn't for them. Very common story.
Yeah.
And you were at that age, so were you aware of what was going on? Follow lead? Did you really go through anything in the transition, or is it just something that kind of petered out because of mom and dad?
I think given the age I was, I
don't have to go to church.
right.
Yeah.
No, but I could sense things going on, and I would overhear mom and dad talk about the interactions with the bishops and the members of the church they were a part of at the time, and so on. And I was in that funky early teenage years, 7th, 8th grade, somewhere in that range when we moved here, and it kind of all started happening. For me personally, I just never felt like I fit in with the kids and with the people. I was more or less not forced, but persuaded to go because mom wanted me to become friends with the kids in my school, and I had to move school so I could become friends with the kids in the church, and it was all just very forced and focused. And I mean, eventually it just seemed to fizzle out.
Yeah. See, what's interesting about that is it's very have and have nots here. And I only got that when I had daughters growing up here. And with Layla, when she was in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, that time frame, she went to girls' camp once and stuff like that, but it was very split.
You're either in it or you're not.
You're either in it or
That's
you're
all
not.
there is.
Unless you're a unique young person who knows who they are, but you're either in it or not. And it's like if you're in it, you don't interact or talk with the kids that are not in it, right?
Yep.
And I mean, Jim, do you? I know that your kids probably aren't quite that age yet, but would you echo that?
Oh, exactly. I mean,
I'm sure it happens to adults.
It's not
too.
just the kids. Yeah, it's in every facet here. With the adults, same thing. You either fit in with it or you don't.
I was always taught either you're with us or you're against us, and that just seemed
which is totally anti-Christian experience.
exactly.
It's total bull.
I mean, we could go all day on the hypocrisy of different things this way and that way, but what I'm really interested in, Jim, is like, what as you kind of went through, or I mean, it's not like you're done going through anything. This is still a transition that you're actively kind of dealing with, because basically what you're dealing with is years and years of a certain mindset, of a certain conditioning, and all of a sudden you kind of have this awakening, and you're like you're almost rediscovering yourself in a way, because now all of a sudden the guilt just stays with you forever, right? And even when you go, I'm done with this, it creeps back in, and I found that certain thought processes and behaviors and the way I would interact with people were all driven by this conditioning that I had, that deep down I still was feeling guilty for. Like, what if I'm wrong? What if? Even though up here in the front of my head, in the conscious, I'm like, it's not for me. And the way that I've always put this, to be as respectful as possible, is that any religion is just a box, right? And it's a box of rules and regulations and this way or that way. And for some people, that box is all they need. And for other people, they start to get uneasy. They start to be miserable, because my opinion about, if you're in a structure like that and you're not happy, it's because the essence of who you are is telling you that something isn't working. And in my experience, as a teenager, the reason I asked you the question about, did you ever, have anything you didn't agree with? I think you were up in Idaho at the time, but I started to get really inquisitive, right? And there were certain things that just didn't make any goddamn sense to me at all. And I would ask people, I'd ask leaders and stuff like that, to the point where I was making certain people uncomfortable with the questions I was asking. I can't exactly remember the age I was, but the bishop took me out of Sunday school and put me into gospel doctrine, because they go deeper there, right? But that just made me have more questions. And so there was just some fundamental things that never sat quite right with me as I, got to a certain age. So what's it been like for you to kind of make this transition? And how old are you now?
I'm 43.
So, as a 42, 43-year-old, what's it been like making this transition?
Like you said, it's been an awakening. Parts of me feel like I'm a teenager, just because I'm rediscovering things of the world, things I didn't have a part of before, things I weren't allowed to discover, touch, taste, feel. For many, many years, even before I moved to Utah, I always wanted more. I wanted more out of life. I didn't want to, like you said, I just living in that box. I just felt like it was too confining, and I felt like I needed to spread my wings. I needed to discover life. I still have I still have good morals. I still value many things in life, like honesty, and some things I don't care for anymore. I'm not too religious. I haven't decided on a belief in God. I want to believe in being true and honest and loving, and find friendship and truth, beauty, and goodness in life, in everything.
Right.
Just not in the Mormon church anymore. I couldn't handle the culture. It was just too exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like you couldn't really speak your mind at church. If you brought anything up that was controversial, you couldn't be an authentic person. And I wasn't really a critical thinker about the things I was taught, because I believed them. I just thought, this is it. I thought I believed these things. I knew it. I went to Korea for 2 years to try to teach these people things, and I honestly regret several years of not making good relationships, even with my father, because I put that religion between us.
Right.
And and I think that is damaging when you let something like that, when you put God in front of family.
Right.
I got a question, and this may be a little off the ball here a little bit, but I just sit here and listen to you tell this story, and as you're telling it, I try and put myself in your perspective and in your shoes. Growing up, I mean, this is a lot of years. This is 9 to 43.
Yeah.
This is a giant chunk of your life. How pissed off are you? Because I know for me, growing up we always talk about hindsight, looking back, I mean, at what point do you ever feel like you got to be you? Never. Because you were constantly guided by these rules, by this trajectory that was taught to you from a young age to experience life that you can't go back and get. And I know for me, I'd feel cheated. I'd feel pissed off. I'd feel angry.
Yeah, there's the grief period. I mean, there's the emotion comes and goes, but I'm trying to level out. I was very angry in the beginning, just because, like you said, I wasn't able to live maybe the life I wanted to live, or be the person I wanted to be.
Right.
Have friends that weren't LDS, maybe even date a girl that wasn't LDS,
Right.
because
Right.
we're taught if you don't stay within these rules,
Right.
you're gonna, it just felt like,
Maybe fondle some boobies.
yeah, is that so bad?
No, it's not bad. That's the point. And you're scared. It's fear tactics.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's do this, and this, or else.
Which is interesting, because I know just from having a few conversations with you, because you've actually, and I get it because of the age you are. When I kind of drifted this direction, I was, in my early 20s, and so it was a lot different. I had a young daughter, but I didn't have a family, so to speak, and stuff like that. But as you're making that transition, or as you're making the transition, in your 40s, right, and you're looking back at all these different things that you may be, like you said, it's like anything. It's like losing a loved one or losing a job. You go through the same, denial, grief, all that crap. You go through the same shit that you would in any of that stuff. So as you've kind of gone through this, I can imagine it's very complex, because because you have a great family, you've got a great job and all this stuff. And so I would imagine there's at times a struggle, or you might feel like you still have to kind of filter yourself, because you don't want to say you regret where you're at necessarily, but maybe you regret a little bit of how you got where you're at. I mean, I don't want to speak for you or anything, but do you feel that that's a little bit accurate?
I feel that, growing up, you're taught to, to go on a mission, and then once you go on a mission, almost go to BYU, because it seemed like you had to follow these steps. Well, yes, I did go to college. I went to Rick's College, and
A church school.
Church school at the time. Well, it still is. And then get married in the temple, have children. The wife stays home, possibly, and I just feel like those are the steps you follow in life.
And if you follow those
things.
steps, you'll be rewarded.
Yeah, equals happiness.
Right, which doesn't always equal happiness.
Because we all know that the joy is in the journey, and your journey has been directed and guided for you.
It seemed like
The whole way.
right. I was following their straight and narrow, but it wasn't. I was leading like somebody else's life. It wasn't my life. I was just like a clone or whatever. Like I didn't feel like I could make any decisions for me. If I wanted to have a cup of coffee, have an alcoholic beverage, that your life is lead into a path of destruction, because those things lead to unhappiness. Because we were just so conditioned that those things lead to unhappiness, and so it's totally fear based, which is
how long ago or how old were you when you
I was just
started to feel this way?
December of last year. Just to tell the quick transition story, serving in the Elders Quorum presidency, and I thought I had developed some good friendships or church friends, and all of us, we were in California of last August, and I get a call from the stake secretary, executive secretary, and served in the Elders Quorum is a stake calling for whatever reason, even though you're only serving in the ward. We get back and we finally meet with them, and I kind of had an inkling that it was for me, because Allison was teaching maybe Sunday school, and the gentleman that was there was, I think, the first counselor, and you had your little chit chat pleasantries in the beginning, and his words were, "We're just going to rip off the Band-Aid and release you as first counselor in the Elders Quorum." And the way he worded it like that was kind of like getting fired or just being excused from the calling. And and then he asked how you feel, and so I gave him some bullshit answer. Yeah, I had a good time, serving with the fathers of the ward, but I didn't have time to process my feelings until, sometime later. And I kind of felt betrayed by my Elders Quorum president, that I thought it was a friend, because I'd gone over to his house several times. I had really made an effort to be friends with him, for him not to tell me. Maybe it's just church policy, which is it's just so...
So he had a heads up. He didn't let you know.
Right.
Do you know why they released you? Was there a reason?
I mean, they just do it. At some point, they make changes.
Right.
Right.
He said, and it was only maybe less than 2 years, a year and a half. And his answer, I just felt like the Lord needed these other guys,
Right.
And that doesn't sound like a very good answer. I mean...
So this was the trigger for you.
Yeah.
To start questioning
that
things.
was the beginning, because it was just unhappiness.
But were you unhappy before that?
Oh, yeah.
But you didn't identify what that the unhappiness might have been caused by this structure that's been formed around you your whole life.
Yeah, I was happy enough to keep going.
Sure,
for
like
just
most
a long
people.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, like most people.
I mean, I really just put on this mask, when I went to church. Not that I drank and smoked and did all these crazy things Monday through Saturday.
Right.
But I went there and I really tried to be the model.
Because you're taught if you're unhappy or something's off, that you need to pray more, read your scriptures more, engage more.
Yes.
And you were doing that,
And
but
it's-
it wasn't working.
And if you're not happy, it's your own fault.
Right.
So,
Right.
and I wasn't researching anything. I did hear one thing in gospel doctrine about Joseph Smith's several different vision accounts.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time, because I didn't read any church history books,
Right.
study anything. I didn't research anything.
This is where it gets really interesting, okay? Because in going through this, I think I've told you, Eric, or going through this, being around as you're going through this, you've told me things that I didn't even know. For me, the transition, there was some guilt things that held on for a while, but it was fairly easy, because at some point I just didn't give a shit. So I didn't care about the details of what the church represents or what they teach you, and then how it probably is a lot different because the historical facts are a lot different, all this stuff. Because I was just busy being a 20-something-year-old with a young daughter, and I just didn't care, right? But as you go through this, you've told me things that I didn't know. And you can go listen to any ex-Mormon podcast and learn all kinds of stuff if you're, recently left the church, and learn things you didn't know. But these things for you, I've noticed, are big slaps in the face, because you were told one thing and you've come to find out later that it's not what you were told, that you're just told this, and the perspective that was given to you was filtered, and it wasn't just all the information.
Yeah, it was. I mean, my church education was very filtered to only say the most positive things about the church, the history that puts the church, gives them the best look. Anything about church history, the real church history, you're not taught.
I can only imagine, like, as you're sitting there saying that story, for me, I was young when we fell out. So for me, sweet.
I'm very jealous.
Nice. This is badass. Cool.
As a kid,
no more
yeah.
church. Because I was 14, I was indoctrinated for 7 years, 7 years. You're indoctrinated a little bit longer. You had a little bit, not a harder transition, but you had some guilt left over.
Right.
This dude's been here for over 30 years.
Right.
Of
Like
it.
a lot of people.
And I can only imagine, a ton of people, I can only imagine that level of conditioning. You can believe it to be bullshit to the 10th degree, but there's such a strong tie to that conditioning through all of those 30 years that...
Well, yeah, there's no question that on certain levels, you are or will suffer from some level of a post-traumatic stress from the transition and stuff. Because in a lot of ways, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would assume that you feel like you were lied to.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't until I told my wife one night, to give you the story, once I was released and I had some time to process it, and I just said, I gotta step back from this, because this is not the way I think I want to be treated or anybody else should be treated. We should be treated upfront and honest. I went to my stake president and with my temple recommend in an envelope, and went to his house and just handed it to him. He's a great guy. I just handed it to him. He didn't know what was in it, and I left. I'm like, see you later. And then he called me maybe the next day or texted me, and that he wants to meet, because he didn't know what that meant with the temple recommend. No notes, no nothing in it. And then that same night, I went to the bishop that was at the church building, and I said, I'm done. I'm not coming back. Next Sunday's my last Sunday. Release me from my calling. I'm not happy. This is, I'm just, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to separate myself. And at the same time, I was listening. I did get turned on to Mormon Stories podcasts about inappropriate bishop interviews, and we can both tell you stories about that. And it wasn't until I decided to leave the church that I started learning all of this historical truth. And then I felt absolutely lied to.
Right.
Because that's not, I was taught one thing, but it wasn't
It was just the good stuff.
Yeah,
the
it
stuff
was
that
all-
lined up and made sense. And
Yeah.
told the best story.
Here's the thing. The internet has become an enlightening mechanism for all kinds of religion. It's like it's devastated the Scientology, population and stuff. And so, let me ask you this. The information has always been out there, right? And now it's more accessible. And it's been a little more accessible. Tell me if you agree with this, but I think that when you have those blinders on, that piece of information might be right there at your access that might make you question, wait, what? But you're almost so devout in it that you just have like a confirmation bias that you just ignore it. Because what's crazy to me is for you to be an adult, and some of the stories that you've told me is that it's crazy that the things that you weren't aware of or that you didn't know, and it's almost like that you just were choosing not to see it because you were so, to your credit, you were so devout in your beliefs. I mean, would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, anything that the church didn't publish or get taught was anti-establishment.
slander.
Right, and so
You
I
don't
didn't-
even look at it.
yeah, read the Book of Mormon, read the Bible, read the standard works of the church, read the manuals, and even I remember the manuals being super thick, and then they changed the manuals because they didn't want the manuals about the scriptures being thicker than the scriptures, so they had to condense that, and all these changes to
Fit the narrative. Jeez.
Right.
Yeah. So how has this transition for you, like, let's start out in your bigger circles real quick. Your extended family, your in-laws, people like that. What is the experience that you've had from people that are still devout and that you're fairly close to, and then seeing you're making this process? I mean, has people been pretty accepting of your process? Has it been difficult? I mean, you don't have to go into too much detail because, I understand that it's something you're still going through, and it's probably something that can be a hot button topic at times, but if you can share a little bit about what it's been like. I mean, let me put it this way. I would imagine if you were single with no kids and no in-laws and no brothers and sisters and things like that, this transition wouldn't be as difficult as it is when you're still surrounded by a structure that you've decided to kind of hop on the other side of the fence of.
Yeah, I'd say I've never been one for large groups, like family groups, growing up with a small family. My mom's an only child, so we didn't have cousins were on my father's side, and those were pretty small too.
Right.
But the in-laws and the family that is included there, I always felt like an outsider because I just didn't like being around 50 kids and everybody screaming louder than the other for attention, and I always felt like the uncle that was just kind of like an asshole because I just didn't have this shit-eating grin all the time and just embrace all my nieces and nephews like, oh, you're a sweet spirit from heaven, and and I couldn't choke that down. Like, I fucking can't stand you. You piss me off. You treat your sibling like shit, and everybody just ignores it, and I call them out, and I know I shouldn't father the kid, but I felt like if at least I was I maybe from an old age of how I was treated, my my uncles and would not kick my ass, but they would tell me,
Call you out on your shit.
call me out. Yeah, exactly. And it seemed like when I do that to them, I would be the bad guy. Like I was always the bad uncle because I wasn't just so engrossed in like family was just the be all and end all of this life.
So you already felt like you were on the outside.
Oh yeah,
But
this
how is that-
even pushed me even further. I mean,
Right.
my wife had outed me with an email to all her family without telling me, so that really hurt our relationship. She, without even saying,
Wow.
do you mind if I write an email to, which, it didn't hurt my, well, it did kind of hurt my feelings because I thought this was my thing, but she had outed me, and I thought, the way the Mormon religion is, you're taught that if one of your sheep is going astray, you leave the 99 and go after the one. Nobody gave a shit about me. And my family around here, brother-in-law and sister-in-law kind of did a little bit with sort of like maybe one or two texts, but it was always, they always had, a purpose. Mm-hmm. He wanted to go out to lunch, It wasn't just because he can, but no, he had a ulterior motive.
Do you feel like, or do you feel like you at least initially wanted people to chase you?
A little bit, because I thought, if they truly love me, why would they want to see me, give up all this, go astray? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if I was, when I was a true believing member, we always went out to those that were going astray.
Right.
We visited them, and that just always kind of was a pain in the ass to me, because you're a grown-ass man. You can make your decisions. If you're not happy here, then that's fine. Find your happiness where...
So I find it real, like this subject you're speaking about, really interesting, because it just shows the complexity and the duality of human beings.
Yep.
Because on one end, you're like, fuck this, I'm out. And on the other side, you're wanting people to kind of try to pull you back in.
I think I wanted people to accept me for who I was, not what I believed. And I think they can't separate those two. Those two seem to be so intertwined that they just can't say, we love you no matter what. Doing these things, or not doing these things doesn't make you...
That's a conditional love.
Am I
right?
Am I misunderstanding then? I mean, so it wasn't that you were necessarily looking for people to be like, hey, Jim, what are you doing? Come back.
I wasn't coming back.
Right. I know you weren't coming back, but I thought maybe you were saying that you were wanting family to try to bring you back in. But it sounds more like what you were looking for, maybe people just to reach out to you and support you,
accept me, validate me.
Right.
Nobody has come to me and said, we know your beliefs have changed. We know you left the church. That doesn't change our love for you, which,
right.
Nobody has come forward and said those words. Not that they need to say those exact words, but at least give me some type of validation that.
Well, support you're looking for. I mean, these are your people.
Right.
Right.
These are your people, the ones who you should be able to count on for that support regardless.
Especially besides family. We were in this ward. We've been there for 4 years, and I can count on one hand how many people have come, just not to save me, but just to stop by and
check on you.
Check on me,
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm a nice guy. At least, I don't know when, it's hard to step out of my own shoes and look inward
right.
to see what other people see, but
doesn't that just help solidify the bullshit ultimately?
Yeah.
You're taught this brotherly love, sisterly love, that you support each other, blah, blah, blah. And in the moment you're on the outs, that's it. You're the black sheep.
Well, actually, you're turned into a goat. You're either a sheep or a goat. And
I think you're a wolf now.
Have you ever seen goats? How much fun goats have? They're always bouncing and jumping off shit, and
they
have
get scared and they faint and they're just falling over.
Yeah, that's my only defense.
No, that's actually a great analogy right there. That's a great analogy. And the thing is I wouldn't be surprised if your experience in that regard is very unique to, because Idaho's super Mormon too,
yeah.
right? And I know you got a lot of family from Idaho, a lot of in-laws from Idaho as well. That's where your wife is from. But I wonder how similar that experience is outside of the church. I'm not outside of the church, but outside of the state, outside of the Mormon belt, so to speak, because this is what I wonder, like, when I moved here and I kind of went through this transition, I wasn't around a bunch of people that I used to be around, you know, but I never really got any kind of different. I probably had friends that had pretty strong thoughts about things, but they never said anything to me. I don't know that they ever really knew, because I was distanced between my closest Mormon friends, but they never really knew maybe where I was at, you know, at least mentally with my convictions and things like that. It was just over time they probably got a good sense that I just wasn't active in their mind anymore like that. But on the same turn, I didn't get anyone that really gave me any grief either. But I didn't have quite the start and stop, you know, transition that you're going through. It's like throwing a car into reverse, I can imagine, where it's just there's a part of you that's like, oh, this feels right, this works for me, and there's another part of you that's like, man, all this bullshit I got to deal with now, you know, which is like uncovering and unwinding the spring that has wound you up. Because I got to imagine you got to look back and be like, shit, I'm not, this is just my perspective, but if it was me, it's like, you know, oh, I was devout, I grew up, I got married, I've only ever been with one woman, you know, not that you're out there looking to be with other women now because you're not Mormon, because your moral compass is still, you know, a true moral compass. But, you know, there's got to be a little bit of regret to go, I didn't have certain experiences. I didn't, especially when I was at an age where it's really important to have those experiences, you know? I mean, I imagine there's got to be quite a bit of regret looking back on what you missed out on, because you were so loyal, right? And there was no payoff for that loyalty, is kind of how I think I would feel.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, growing up, it wasn't always about, you know, sex. It wasn't, you know, I wanted to have experiences, but it wasn't always just about girls. It wasn't centered around girls. I mean, yes, I had, you know, hormones like teenagers and then 20-some, you know, but, you know, it's just, I had an experience where someone close to me got, you know, was dating and got pregnant, and I associated, you know, if you sleep with a girl, she'll get pregnant. Or, you know, when we were growing up, it was STDs. You know, if you have, you know, unprotected sex, you'll have some venereal disease.
More fear.
It wasn't. We didn't have the internet. All we had, the education we had was either books or, you know, word of mouth, and you couldn't really trust that. So it scared me from really exploring just everything in life, rather than just exploring everything at church. You know,
right.
just going to church and just trusting them with everything I had, even though, you know, you had to feel guilty about, you know, thoughts or watching a rated R movie, you know, with a naked woman, because, you know, heaven forbid, you know, you have thoughts, and then thoughts lead to actions. Right. And then, you know, I thought, well, that's just going to lead me to, you know, it just always felt like it was going to lead to negative things.
Right.
So I just
stayed away. See, It's so crazy because, and it just, I don't know. I mean, it might just show a difference in all kinds of things, even outside of the church. Because Eric and I were born into the church, you know what I'm saying? But we had, like, the idea that the difference between somebody who, like you said, what your experience is, where you were afraid of where it would lead you, so you just avoided it. And then in my experience, where, you know, I played with fire, you know what I mean? And I don't know, there's probably differences, conditioning differences outside of being Mormon that made that difference, let's just say in you and I, you know what I mean? But we knew plenty of people that were as apparently devout as the next guy, but would find themselves in certain situations, premarital sex, having a kid, and it's a very you get lumped into this very shunning kind of aspect of things, but that's just life, That's just life. That's just people, experiencing things, making bad decisions, and then, having consequences of those bad decisions. But the idea that it affects your moral ending, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but that it has an effect on your state of being after this life is kind of silly. You know what I mean? Because of a choice you made or a mistake you made that was, X, Y, or Z. So I find it just really interesting that, that it did keep you away from doing X, away from trying or experimenting with certain things, because in a lot of ways I think it's to your credit in a way, because if you're in the system and this is what you're supposed to do in the system, then you were winning. You know what I mean? You were doing the right thing. A lot more than most of our friends around you were doing. You were the good one, comparatively. But, and the other thing too is, did you find when in the people that your peers in your church going through this transition, like, elders quorum people or the bishopric or whatever, did any of them try to counsel you to maybe not make this transition?
No. I mean, I had the stake president come over shortly after being released. I think after I gave him my recommend, he kind of snuck in with the new elders quorum presidency, but not the president. Mm-hmm. He kind of snuck in which is probably like the second time somebody has came in the 4 years to visit me in that house. Just as kind of more of like a social call, like how are you doing type of thing. And
after the fact.
Yeah. And, I was still, for most part, I'm still a happy person I was then,
right.
If not more happy, because I didn't have, like you said in the beginning, there was a weight had been lifted off. Like I felt
right.
lighter.
Well, that's a lot of pressure growing up to follow X, Y, and Z and try and control your thoughts, which are uncontrollable in the first place, to stay on this path. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of guilt. That's a lot of pressure to deal with. Yeah. I imagine that weight is huge.
When it lifts off you.
I mean, once you can come to terms with it, you're still in the process, and there's still that battle, that inner turmoil between what you were conditioned with to what you are experiencing now. But eventually,
do you think it would have made, to Eric's point, and what you were just talking about them coming over and stuff like that, and now you really didn't have that many visitors? Do you think it would have made a difference to you if, let's say, when you moved into this area in Clearfield and in this ward and stuff like that, if you had really created some sincere relationships and bonds, and you felt really close to these people, and you didn't experience some of the, I'm just going to say shadiness or kind of, some of the things that rubbed you the wrong way. If it was all encompassing and you really felt close to these people and engaged in whatnot, do you think it would have made a difference, or it would have slowed down the process at all?
I mean, I really tried to make good friends with everybody. When I moved in to these wards, I really made an effort to make good friends, but it seemed like always a one-sided thing. Like I was always the one going out of my way to initiate the friendship, going over to their house or texting or calling or visiting for no not like a church call or a church purpose, just because. I mean, I think this was inevitable in my life, this process.
I agree.
And I think I fought it for a long, long time.
Okay, so I've got a question for you that you may have not even thought of, but I'm just interested in this. Because you doing that, you going the extra mile, you really trying to make friends and be a good person and to people in the church and in your ward and stuff like that. Do you think that when you were doing that, making that conscious effort to do that, do you think that somewhere inside that was an unconscious move because you were looking for something more than you had? Like it was like the first telltale sign that you were trying to engage in it more to get some sort of satisfaction or find another level of joy or satisfaction in your life? You think maybe that was going on?
Yeah. I mean, even in Las Vegas, my wife had made excellent friends down there, and she's still very close to her Las Vegas friends. But me, I'm more close, and I keep in better contact with those that aren't members of the church, just co-workers, because I thought those guys are struggling similar to me, just struggling through life, family, or just work or whatnot. But I keep in better contact with those non-members of the church than members of the church, because in the church, everything is provided for you. Your friends are provided for you. You don't need to bring...
It all feels fake. It doesn't feel like anyone's being real with you.
Right.
And it's hard to develop a friendship, a good quality friendship on something like that.
And I feel once I open my eyes to that like, no, I'm living fake. These, I don't want to say these people are fake, but it all seems make-believe. I feel like sort of the Truman Show or the Matrix, where everything in front of me is just
you start to see through the
predetermined and
right.
Yeah.
So, man, that's really interesting that you kind of started to see that.
I mean, and that's why
I
think I started spending more time with you, because you know me. You don't have any. Our friendship and love isn't conditional on me going to church or anything. The friendship is just based on just being authentic and having fun. And even if we don't really do much at the shop, at least
you get to be you, right?
Right. And we get to laugh, and we get to reminisce and
right. Well, I tell you, it's powerful because, most of my close friends were back in California, and I was up here doing my thing and living my life differently than they were, or at least what I understood. But every time one of them would come to visit, there was always this thing where it's like, oh, I was afraid to let them know all the way where I was at in my thought process, because I was worried that I would lose, or I would create distance between friends if they were like, oh, he don't believe anything I believe anymore. And then, which was my bad, because to all my friends' credit, and I just think this is what happens when you're young and you create real bonds, which I'm thankful for, because I wouldn't have made those friends if it wasn't for the church. So I'm grateful for that. But once I finally went, fuck it, I'm just gonna be who I am. I'm not gonna sit Nate down or sit you down or whoever down and be like, okay, listen, this is how it is. But when I was around these people, I just started to just be who I was and what I was. And with certain friends, it was harder to be fully myself around than others, because I was closer to them, or our bonds were different or whatever. But I totally get that. And I wonder, I would imagine it's probably something that in a way I'm envious of you, because your transition is so quick, flip of a coin. I feel like my transition was a lot slower and at a distance, and I shielded. When I'm talking about the outward perspective of others that I was worried about, I was, 400 miles away, so I didn't have to worry about it too much. For you, the reason I'm envious is because of that flip. I feel like that's something potentially, and I could be wrong, but that you'll struggle with a lot less. Like, you probably won't give as much of a shit what old friends might think about your transition, because it's so poignant in your life right now. It's such a big transition.
And I'm the reason why I kind of flipped so fast, because I didn't want this transition, from being so indoctrinated in a certain faith. I wanted to leave it as quickly as possible, and I'm stopped listening to so many, not anti-Mormon, but just podcasts that are kind of focused around, maybe a person's exit from the church.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to focus more on secular podcasts, learning about the world that I've been living in,
getting different perspectives.
Exactly. And with social media, I didn't want to pretend to be something I'm not anymore. And I don't think I'll lose. I mean, my family, or at least my in-law family, that I've always been sort of kind of the outcast anyways, and this has just added more distance to it. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that because, I feel like a zombie, and if I bite somebody, they'll get infected. So until somebody in that circle of family comes to this, maybe a conclusion about something, or has an idea, or they've heard something, hopefully they will come to me, and say, hey, you've made this change. I think it'll be my younger nieces and nephews that will find out certain things about the church and come to me and see that, I'm still a happy person. I think I'm a good father. I'm still providing for my family. I haven't quit work. I haven't cheated on my wife.
Yeah, I mean, you're still Jim. You're not going to be out raping and murdering people. It's not like you have changed as a moral person.
But you're taught that if you don't follow those prescribed rules, that's what you're going to do.
Going to happen. Yeah,
your light is just shining now. This is the thing and you're probably right. You'll probably have, if you have extended family members and stuff that have questions or struggle, they may come to you for that. That's the thing about, this is going to probably sound kind of arrogant in a way, but seeing you struggle, and because I've been through this before with other friends and went through it myself, seeing you struggling and you spending more time hanging out up here with us, where we're not going to filter, we're not just talking the same bullshit that you hear every Sunday. You know what it is? I just knew that if you're already at a stage where you're questioning, it was just going to accelerate the process, because you're getting perspectives that aren't, you spend all day, every day, when you're LDS in these perspectives, and that's all you're getting. It's like you say, it's a tunnel of that information. And as soon as you start interacting with people that have different perspectives about things, now you start to question things. Now little cracks show up in the armor of, and lights coming through is kind of how I visualize it in my head. But how has this process, I mean, and you don't feel free not to answer if you don't want to, but how has it affected, your marriage? Because your wife is LDS, she grew up LDS, and she's still LDS.
Yeah, they call it a mixed faith marriage, and
of course they do.
It's not a new term,
right?
But
it's new to me.
Yeah, the kids don't want to go to church, but because they see, Dad is off, doing some fun things. I found support outside the church, which they say that once you leave the church, there's, where will you go? And the truth is, there's plenty of places everywhere to go on Sunday.
Anywhere I damn well please.
It's easier to shop on Sunday. Yeah. I found a support group, and we go to a coffee shop, and those are the most authentic and genuine people. And so nervous the first Sunday going in, just because it was totally new, but
so crazy.
Once you go in, I mean, it just felt like I shed this skin of who I used to be, and I can see all these people, and I just felt like their light that was in them is shining so much more brighter now than it used to, because the armor that you're told to put on, the armor of God, to shield yourself from all these fiery darts of the adversary that, they don't exist.
They're not there.
The weight of the armor, you leave it, and I've become so close, in a sense, to these people that, we can have real conversations about real things and joke about, how we were in the religion and the marriage part of it. It sucks because it's for a long time, even kind of before my faith crisis and transition, it was just felt like, there's other things in the marriage that, we have trouble on, but I feel like the basis of Mormon marriages maybe isn't always love, because one, you can't touch each other, intimately before marriage, because you don't get to know someone who they are. You can't live with them. You can't have sex. You can't, even have conversations regarding anything sexual, like, hey, what do you like? Or, what do you prefer? Because
what's your favorite position?
God, that sounds crazy as shit to me. Like, I'm sorry.
But it sounds crazy as shit to you because you didn't
No, I know.
cross into adulthood with it.
No, I know. I can imagine the mental mindfuck that ultimately becomes, but wow.
yeah, I'm sure other people can support and bear witness of that the first night is not a very fun night, because it's
Very awkward.
Yeah, you can, it's, everything is no, 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 and then all of a sudden it's yes. And to make that change, like, I don't know who I am sexually. I don't.
Yeah.
I've
I
never
don't know what I like.
yeah, and
Yeah.
to always just, and now,
And then 20 seconds later, it's over.
and then now, this is the same person I gotta be intimate with forever,
Right.
which it seems confining. It just
Which
doesn't seem like, who can really live like that? That's gotta be tough.
Well, and that's tough, religion or not, for a lot of people. It just depends, on who you are, what you are. But the added aspect of religion definitely complicates that. And having a mixed faith marriage, as you put it, has got to be tough.
I'm supporting my wife in her faith. She's
Of course.
still going to church. She takes the kids. I haven't put up any type of fuss in demanding that, no, the kids will go with me today.
Well, and that's a question I've been having in my mind for the last little while now with parenting your kids, and with your light coming through in the bullshit that you're seeing behind this all. Like, how's that going to affect your parenting style with your kids? Or is it you got to learn your own way, or is it, I've kind of learned better, so I want to help guide my kids? I mean, I'm just curious if you even know yet.
I think, having a faith, having grown up with a faith gives you a lot of tools to raise your kids in a good way. I think about my brother-in-law and sister in Las Vegas that are amazing parents. Their kids are just wonderful kids. I'm so jealous of them raising kids they're smart, they're talented. I have a niece down there that's doing triathlons, and she's 14.
Oh, wow.
She just was in Ohio, swimming, biking, and running. And I think, gosh, none of my other nieces and nephews are that involved, in something like that. Yeah, some of them can play the piano and, maybe do a sport, but I was always jealous of how they raise their kids, and they're not even, they're sort of religious, but they don't let it define them, or let them, they're not taught these things to raise their kids this way.
Right.
They're doing it.
They're doing the best they can.
Their way.
Yeah.
And I don't think they've read all these books out there, but you can raise wonderful kids and not be religious. You can be agnostic, you can be atheist, Buddhist, or no religion and no belief in anything, but still, just love them, teach them to be good people.
Just be a decent human being, and we're good.
I think we're just given the basic tools within ourselves,
Right.
And some people maybe not, but I think
So that's
internally we can do it without.
That's kind of your approach then, is just to just be an example. Because that's the thing. It's got to be a little bit tricky with your wife, you know, in the direction that she has her faith
Because
going.
I imagine there's some people who have left their church and go and try and, with everything they got, protect their kids from the bullshit they experienced in the church, and no, and just cut that off. You know, and not to say that that's obviously a good thing to do. You know, I think sometimes choice is good for the kids, but, you know, I was just kind of curious if...
Yeah, I think choice is very key in raising kids. Don't always just give them one choice or just one path. I want them to create choices, make choices, good choices, bad choices.
Well, I have a personal theory that any structured religion potentially is pretty good for children up until the ages of 13 or 14, when they start to really discover who they are. And then I think that they, at that point, need to be able to have a say or a choice, or be able to ask the questions.
Yeah, I think by that point, your moral compass is what it is at that point, and you have those
Right.
basic tools to be a decent person and make decent choices. Not that you're not going to fuck up over time, but, you know, and then, like you say, at that point,
Yeah, it's
branch.
like, you know, with my young teenagers, when they got to the age, I'm not telling them what to believe. And they ask me what I believe when it comes to God or this or that. And they ask me 1 year and it's one thing. And they ask me another year and it's another thing. And that's the point, is that it shifts and grows. But I don't ever tell them what to. I've never really told them what to believe. And that would be the difference in what we experienced, is that, you know, at 14, if you have a question, no, this is how it is. I tell my kids all the time, I don't really know. I don't really know. You'll just have to see what sits best with you for the time you're at in your life right now, and it'll change and it'll ebb and flow, and that's the whole point. It is whatever you want it to be. It's kind of the position I take, and so it sounds like that you're just kind of taking that approach, is that you're not like, I don't want the kids learning this stuff. You're more like, let them learn. If they have questions, I'll give them my opinion, or, you know, whatever. You'll give them choices.
Yeah, they're right now, you know, mom is taking them to church, and I'll support that. But they are still young, 11 and 9, so they are making small choices for themselves. I mean, just like real selfish ones, but not really, you know, big choices in life. And one evening not too long ago, my son and I, and maybe all of us, and we were just on our small little porch, and I like to just sit out on the porch once the sun has kind of gone down behind, you know, the house where it shades my porch, and I was having a beer. And you know, I haven't become a raging alcoholic, and I feel like sometimes like a child trying to navigate some adulthood decisions, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And Weston asked if that was alcohol, and I said yes. And I said, what do you think about that? And he kind of gave this, like, put his finger across his neck and kind of acted like, you know, you die. And I said, do you really think that? Do you think Dad would do something that would, you know, potentially hurt him? And I said, it's not bad. Having a drink of alcohol doesn't make you bad, but he's kind of already been conditioned to think that that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And I've done some study and learned that coffee sometimes is even prescribed for pregnant women to help them in their pregnancy. So coffee does have benefits. It's just not an evil drink.
I mean, anything in excess is bad for you.
Sure.
It's about
everything
balance.
in moderation.
It's moderation. Variety is the spice of life, as they say. Yeah.
I wanted to circle back to something that you said a little bit earlier, which I was glad to hear you say. In the transition of what you're going through and finding support groups and listening to and basically uncovering some of the things that you've learned about the church and stuff like that you weren't aware of before. And this is just my opinion, but I've had plenty of living here, you know, 20 plus years. I've seen people go through this. I think it's important that if you're making the transition, is to be careful not to swing the pendulum all the way to the other side, where you become so anti the establishment, anti the religion, that now that's just your new religion. Because I know a lot of people that everything they are is, because of the damage, is bring it down, shut it down. We've got to stop this. We've got to stop that. Yeah. And so, but then that just becomes another identifying mark. And you mentioned that a little bit earlier, that you're kind of starting to find your own way, where you're more concerned with just having experiences, with learning other perspectives of what's out there. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, there's a say in the ex-Mormon community, you can leave it, but you can't. You can leave it, but you can't leave it alone.
Mm-hmm.
I just recently went to a kind of an ex-Mormon retreat, which isn't anti-Mormon at all, but a lot of the people there were. And there's some that are still. A lot of them were still attending.
Oh wow!
Members, and a lot of them had left the church, and a lot of them had left years and years ago, and still can't leave it alone. I want to leave it alone. I'm not going to preach anti-Mormon. I'm going to give my perspective, my feelings when it comes to raising my children or in my life.
Right.
But I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to be not this same person I was. I'm not swinging the pendulum the other way and turning to booze and all kinds of drugs, but
just kind of finding your path.
Right. I'm just finding my own path, like you said.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
So listen, we don't want to keep you too long, but I just wanted to throw one more thing out there. Because I guarantee you a lot of what you said tonight is going to help people that are listening to this that have struggling things. You may not think so, but trust me, and you'll probably see that. If someone is on that fence line, if they're not happy and they are now maybe identifying that they're not happy because of the constraints of their religion, specifically the Mormon Church, is there any advice that you would give someone?
And it can't be pray about it, because that just doesn't work.
Right, right.
Well, funny thing about praying about it is, you can be told something and, you pray about it if it's true or not. But if the answer you get that it's not true, well, you got to pray about it until you come to that conclusion. Like the answer does not match the answer the church gives you. So there's so many things.
Sounds like a vicious cycle to me.
So if you could, if I could offer advice, and I'm not one to, I don't have any wisdom at all, but the thing I would say is live authentically. Live how you want to live. Be the person you want to be. Don't be a person somebody else wants you to be or God wants you to be. I think God, if God wants to talk to me, I think if there is a God, come down and tell me what I need to do. Don't filter it through some old man with some old thought, that's, almost a century old. Mm-hmm. God would say, this is your life. That's your body. That's your mind. If he gave it to me, then it's mine. It's like somebody giving you a gift and telling you what to do with that gift. No, that's your gift. Do whatever you want. That's, I give you $20, spend it how you want. Like my boy, he got a bunch of money for his birthday. He wanted to spend it on some toys, and we were he had something he wanted to buy, but then he changed his mind, and we fully supported him. He wanted to buy off Amazon. He researched on Amazon to find the exact thing he wanted. We didn't put up a fuss. He wanted to spend almost all of his money. Okay, that's your choice. And I think I'd say live authentically. Live without making other people happy, because I think that leads to true unhappiness, is when you're living to make somebody else happy. I mean, I know you want to live to make, your wife, your girlfriend, your kids happy, but I think if you're happy in what you're doing, I think they'll be happy too, because they'll see, hey, Dad's happy and he doesn't go to church. Dad's happy, he has a drink, or, he hangs out with people that don't go to church and does these coffee meetups. Maybe there is something more to this life than just always going to church and checking these boxes. So the journey, I think we're here, whatever we're doing here, I think we're here for the journey, not the end. Because I think the journey, is more, we find more happiness in the journey than we will in the end.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. That gave me goosebumps. Well, thanks, man. We really appreciate you coming on and talking to it. I know it probably wasn't the easiest thing to talk about some of these stuff, especially because you're going through them, but we really appreciate it.
No, congratulations. I'm super excited for you.
Yeah.
Thank you. If it wasn't for you guys, really, I mean, I know Eric's a lot younger than me, but, without your friendship and you having this space to do this, I think everybody has an important story. Everybody's story is different. We all have so much we can learn from each other. I didn't realize how these podcasts they're really good podcasts. You guys are really doing good work and just bringing forth these stories that are there, that are just in the world that we don't know they're there. Yeah. So, and a shout out to all my other California friends that are listening to this eventually. You mean the world to me, because without those, teenage friends, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be who I am today. And so I got to say thank you, and I love you.
Thanks, man. Love you too. That's a great compliment. Thanks.